Well, welcome to our podcast, Stories from Here to Everywhere, where we explore stories about community based global learning from here to everywhere, connecting communities, classrooms, and cultures through the Community Based Global Learning Collaborative. And we're your hosts.
I'm Mac
I'm,
Benavides.
and I'm Dennis McCunney. And for today's episode, we're happy to be joined by Maya Malik. Welcome, Maya. Glad you're here. Wondering if you could share with us a little bit about yourself to the audience to help us know who you are and a little bit about the context of your work related to community-based global learning.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Maya Malik, pronouns they, them. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm now at a PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Yeah, my background is in social work, social intervention research, focusing on using arts-based methods to design and evaluate programs with youth. Um, so yeah, I came to arts-based methods from social work, basically recognizing that working with folks who've had trauma, trying to tell people stories, folks who've had trauma, sometimes the best way to kind of digest something, break it down and explain it to other folks is using the arts. And so I kind of really came to arts-based methods from that perspective, and then started using arts as a form of knowledge production. So just kind of, yeah, kind of going from one place, mental health focus, to more arts-based research. But yeah, just really excited to kind of talk about the arts, the role they have with community engagement and service learning in general.
Awesome.
That
Awesome.
that's amazing, Maya. I'm as someone who really appreciates arts-based and narrative research. This is your work is right up my alley, and I'm really excited to have you be here today and sharing a little bit about the work that you do. I'm curious when you talk about integrating arts-based methods into community engagement. I know that a lot of the work that you do also focuses on using that as a tool for power sharing, and I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about how does that work?
Yeah. So I'm someone who comes from a family of quant folks. So my mom is a mechanical engineer, my dad's in IT. I grew up kind of being told that numbers are a language that we all speak. And that
Mm.
never really made sense to me because that's not necessarily how I encounter numbers. Excuse me, I'm a theater kid. I grew up telling stories. Those are kind of the ways that information resonates with me. And so growing up, it was really, really confusing to have like one side of myself be so focused on science and experimentation, the other side focused on storytelling and for people to tell me that they're not the same. Basically telling me like, yeah, numbers are like the universal language. And so I think so just getting older, kind of being pushed more into research, I recognize that I'm not the only person that numbers may not resonate for. So coming from social work, my background is focusing on public health. There is a really, really awesome evidence-based practice called Photovoice that I felt like was a really,
Mhm.
really great way for me to learn about evidence-based practices, learn about evidence-based practices that are arts-based, and then something that's arts-based, not just focusing on data collection or dissemination, but kind of throughout the process. So yeah, if you're not familiar with Photovoice, it's basically a public health research technique that someone worked on when they were working with more international populations. So it's for folks who are working on a community-based research project, but we may not speak the same language. You might have to have more than one interpreter involved. And with the method, basically, folks are given training on how to take photos. They take photos around a specific question. They bring those photos back together as a group and they do like a thematic analysis. And then ultimately, they explain whatever said question was using these pictures in a sort of gallery-based dissemination tactic. So yeah, I think photo voice is like a pretty good example of something um, that is arts based through and through, but kind of frames stories and frames other people's kind of information in a way that makes it easy to share.
Yeah, a little
That's
bit
that's
easier to
su-
share than like number voice.
right.
For real.
Yeah, yeah. I'll have to look for that app. I don't think that exists. Um, so that's really interesting, Maya. I think that, and as a parent of several self-described theater kids, I can relate, right, to some of the ways that they just see the world differently, and love that. I think one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast is kind of some of the key tenets of the collaborative. One of them being this idea of paying ongoing attention to power, privilege, and positionality throughout programming, coursework, research, etc. And it seems like your work really speaks to that. Any thoughts on kind of how your particularly your methodology and research design address power, privilege, and positionality?
I would say this is one of the examples, like this is a specific thing that I was helped a lot by having a background in social work. So if folks aren't familiar, for someone to do a master's in social work, there is a large component that's a practicum. Social work also has like these very clear values that are pretty important. So most people see social work as just like clinical work, but it can be everything from community organizing, program evaluation, politics. But there are these core values. And a big value within social work is not only like taking care of other folks, but it's also things like self-determination,
Mhm.
just like things that are baked in there about caring for people in a relational way, but then also respecting other people, which kind of really helps with what I do, if that makes sense. It helps when you're working with folks who may have different goals from different communities, different populations, different backgrounds, to make sure that you're not just working like with someone, but you're considering their long-term goals as well as yours.
Mhm.
One of the things that comes to mind for me with art-based work, and Photovoice as a really great example, is what are some of the ways that you can help participants, whether that's students, educators, community partners, whoever that might be, uh, to embrace kind of the ambiguity of and the subjectivity of art, right? Like there is not a correct photo to bring in to address this question, right? And oftentimes when I've worked, especially with adults, I'll say there's this like ingrained mentality that, well, what exactly, like what are the parameters? What are these specific things that you're looking for? How do I get the right answer? And so I feel like some of that, some of the work, the relational work you mentioned, requires breaking down that expectation. I'm wondering what's your experience been with that?
Yeah, no, I feel like that's the big difference between kind of arts for aesthetic and enjoyment, right, versus arts like for a specific purpose. When you're doing a photo voice project, you're not taking a picture so it looks beautiful. You're taking a picture that looks beautiful that also explains something that has to do with the question. My background in social work, if you're working with someone who's dealt with trauma and they draw you a picture and they talk about it, you're not concerned with how nice the picture looks. You're concerned with what they're trying to say through drawing that picture in the first place. And I think that's a really, really big part of it is that everyone can draw, even if it's not beautiful, even if you're not drawing something amazing. It's just more about using that drawing and using that way of describing something as a shared language to have with someone already. Right? Like we know that when you're drawing something, it may not be perfect, but it might involve like a stick figure. Like we know what the stick figure stands for. We kind of like know how to move things around, and so it's really just kind of getting to that exploration and being able to use that to express something to someone else. And I think that's really the big deal. That's one of the things that makes arts-based methods really, really accessible when people kind of get past their need to make something like a specific artifact that looks good. Most people know how to interact with something arts-based, right? They know how to draw. They might not be the best at it. They may not know how to act perfectly, but they can do some improv. These are like really pretty like simple and accessible ways for folks to kind of communicate around something, if that makes sense, even if you're not an expert.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking too about, one of the other components of the collaborative is this idea of critical reflective practice. And, all of us as practitioners, educators, scholars, community leaders do that, in different ways depending on our context. And I, as an experiential educator, a global educator, I'm always looking for new innovative ways to help students engage in critical reflection, right? To kind of keep it fresh, to make it relevant and meaningful for them, and also to teach them to be peer leaders for reflection. And it seems like things like Photovoice and just general arts-based education can be a really helpful tool for guiding um, um, clients, students, et cetera, participants in reflective practices, would you say, generally?
I would say that arts are a great way to do some sort of reflexive practice. For a lot of times when folks are doing a qualitative research experiment, you want to have something to kind of keep track of where you are versus the questions you're asking. Like you want some way to keep track of you as the researcher. And I have actually been recently doing this using sort of a comic method or zine
Mm,
method, right? Just like multimodal. So I'm drawing things, but I'm also writing and describing them, making my own little key so I can have as much information as possible and do it as quickly as possible. So that, if I'm thinking something and that impacts the question that I ask, right, that I still have that information recorded here some way that I can look back on when I'm actually looking at the data.
Mhm.
mm,
I'm a huge fan of using metaphors or illustrations in my classes to get students to think about concepts in another way, and that they have to generate these, right? So, because it's one thing to put it all into words, because we can just copy and paste or paraphrase what's been written in the text, but to have to then take that and say, what's a metaphor I could come up with, or what is a an image that I could use to illustrate this? It requires them to think in a different way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it shows that the arts are not just these kind of like small mediums. They're their own ways of knowing. They're their own kind of entire thought processes with communication built in. And so that you're getting like not just art, not just the thing you're communicating, but like something altogether new when you're using it in that way.
mm. Yeah. And Maya, I mean, you developed this really interesting line of practice, reflective practice, and research. What do you hope to do with this in the future? What are some of your personal professional goals? Can you share with us?
Yeah, so my goal is to be an arts-based methodologist. I feel like we are a society that's open to quant methodologists that
Mm,
kind of like have the skills, but not necessarily when it comes to qual folks or arts-based folks. So yeah, I kind of like to describe myself as Thanos. Every arts-based method's a different ring. I'm trying to get like a full ring. And the whole point is so that I can work with youth using whatever method makes the most sense to them. I hate it when like a group of youth come into a room and are really familiar with something and they want to use something, but the person facilitating the space may not be familiar with it. So my goal is to get out of the way of my research and whatever the youth that I'm interacting with want to utilize. Hopefully, I'll be able to figure out a way to support them in utilization.
cool, cool.
What are some of so you mentioned photo voice, so photo, use of images in that way. What are some of the other arts-based methods that you use or
So
examples that you could share with the audience?
yeah, so my background is mostly theater. So a lot of theater of the oppressed, a lot of improv, playback theater. But then on the other side, I've had some fun using some kind of like songwriting and poetry. So I love a blackout poem, or even kind of word association poems. Those are really fun. And I haven't used them myself, but I know there are some folks who have been getting really interested in embodying things, like embodied places. Let's say your what does it look like to work in this space? Like how is that embodied versus, in some other ways? But I think for me, I've mostly been focusing on visual methods. So that plus this idea of maybe curation and creation with youth when it comes to some of the more arts-based spaces.
Mm. I'm curious too. You've certainly, hopefully, found a home and kindred spirits within the community-based global learning collaborative. You know, not only kind of with respect to shared goals and outcomes, but common interests and reflective practices, research methods. What other professional associations have you found a home in, or how have your approaches kind of been received, right? I know in many ways, traditional quantitative methodologies and traditional research methods are much more accepted, quote unquote, than others, right, or preferred. So, any thoughts on that as you continue your career in academia?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Coming from the world of social work, I'm always looking at social intervention spaces, participatory action research spaces. Those are pretty good. And then also just being on the side of education, there's a lot of experiential learning spaces, a lot of expeditionary learning spaces. And I'm someone who's mostly focused on K through 12, so it's nice to also see that there are some spaces that are more higher ed focused, but
Hmm.
are like solely service learning spaces. So
Right, right. That's great. Yeah, we'll be presenting, right? We work together on a proposal for talking about this podcast in particular, but talking about kind of ways to be able to collectively share some of the impact around global learning practice at the upcoming IR Slice Conference, International Association of Research and Service Learning and Community Engagement, longest acronym ever, in New Orleans in the fall. So we'll be there. So hopefully be able to share some of this work again as well.
yeah, thanks for
Any
having
other?
me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, this was a really fun way to, I don't know, kind of like talk about arts and all the things that are bubbling around.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 And we have our shameless plug about our presentation coming up at Irish Slice. Any other upcoming publications, blog posts, or presentations that you've got coming up that would be helpful resources for other people?
I just have one coming up at Irish Slice too on knowledge democracies and epistemic justice. I just finished something at a arts and healing conference. Um, I'm trying to think of what else. And I think everything else I'm kind of just waiting back to hear. But yeah, so IR Slice is like my next thing.
Very good.
And
Well,
hopefully a podcast for the collaborative too, right, Mac? Yeah.
yes,
All right.
and hopefully a blog post as well.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Yes, I forgot about the blog post. Hopefully blog post.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Maya, again for joining us today. And that's it for today's episode. Make sure to click subscribe to keep up to date on all things community-based global learning. And we also invite you to check out the Collaborative's website, cbgl.collab.org. So that's cbglcollab.org to access resources and toolkits, read the newest blog posts, and learn more about fair trade learning. From the website, you can also join the Collaborative's mailing list to receive news and updates, and you can stay connected by following the Collaborative on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Slack. Look for the links in the description below. If you have something that you want to share on our podcast or the CBGL blog, you can nominate yourself or others to share about work and experiences that are empirically grounded, inform practice, and demonstrate application of the principles we share. And as always, from here to everywhere, thanks for tuning in.